and welcome to SciFi Weekly.
January is the month of archives, isn't it, Matt?
Yes, Amber. Yeah, we've done that. This is number 4 now, but we are working towards original content for February and onwards. Sometimes you just need a bit of a break to find your feet, get things moving. This one is the first of the new, more regular podcasts that would later become the Trek Zone Spotlight. We heard from him a few weeks back about those we'd lost in the Star Trek family, but Larry Nemecek joined me back in November 2013 for a chat about his career.
Hey Matt, thanks for having me.
Now, you got started in Star Trek back in the early 90s, writing The Next Generation Companion. You've written a couple of episodes of, or you contributed a script to Voyager, and now you're actually acting on a fan series called Star Trek Continues as Dr. McCoy. How did it all come about?
Well, the easy answer is to blame my 9th grade science teacher, Mrs. Pollard, wherever you are, who shamed me into watching Star Trek because she couldn't believe I wasn't watching it in the after school reruns that we had, where tons and tons and tons of people came to Star Trek if they didn't see it prime time in the 60s. So yeah, I blame Mrs. Pollard, and and then of course the show itself for hooking me in, and a lot of patient people since then, a lot of good friends.
So what was it like getting started in Star Trek, writing that companion? And
Well, Sonny, yeah. Well, no, I mean, like, I'd been a fan, and I'd also, harking back to Shatner's famous Saturday Night Live skit, I had a life. I had a theater and a journalism background, went to school in that. I worked in news. I put acting aside. I have a master's degree in theater also, in directing. But I needed a paycheck, and I didn't want to go be a starving, martyred young boy for theater. So I went back home and went into news and into print journalism, weekly and daily, and wound up being. But I combined a lot of that, and I wrote and I did some community theater. But I was a fan. I did fandom. We did conventions. We had our local clubs, and Next Generation came out, and it was kind of like a whole new breath of air again. There was something new, and I started doing a yearly concordance, kind of based on B. Joe Trimble's original classic Star Trek concordance, which was like an encyclopedia and an episode guide. And it was also when Macs were coming out, and so desktop publishing was a new deal, and I kind of learned Macs and all of that together, and with FileMaker for a database, and started doing an encyclopedia, and fan published it. It got to Paramount. The writers were using it, licensing heard about it, and I was kind of a finalist, and then was chosen very quickly to do the companion. It was a hurry up and wait thing. The show was on for 5 years. Next Generation was out for 5 years and a huge hit, and they finally decided, well, maybe nonfiction reference books will sell. And I make fun now because back then it was very dicey. Yeah. So that's the story of the companion, and then it unleashed a whole slew of everything that's come since for me professionally. Part of the appeal of Star Trek is it hit people right off the bat, and people that watch the 60s show still, the first thing that strikes you is that's a complete universe they managed to make on that little piddly budget in the 60s. And you feel like you could just crawl through your TV screen and walk right into that universe and be there. There's very few shows, even sci-fi shows, that are that compelling. And that's what's in everybody, whether you wanted to play a role or just explore around or go see how the gadgets worked. The reaction of people when they become Trek fans, it's somewhere on that thing, but one way or another, you want to climb through that TV screen and walk in, and you know that if you go down this corridor and turn left, even though we never saw what was down there, you know exactly what would be there. Or if there was a room or a planet that you'd never seen or heard, just had heard about, you knew. And that's what's so compelling about the show, and that's what drives all of this, the nonfiction books and prop makers and shipbuilders and costume makers, cosplayers. That's one of the appeals of Star Trek, and that's one of the things that's never given up, and that's what hit me. And I worked on organizing the stars and planets, and tried to do a map based on what the tech manual's format was. It was barely filled in. And then a few years later, got in touch with Jeffrey Mandel, who worked one of the guys on the medical reference, told him, I critiqued some of his stars and said, some of these won't work. Your star for the Klingons is closer than your star for the Vulcans. And we started writing back and forth, and he said, well, thank you. 3,000 other people have told me that, but you're the nicest one of all of them. So you didn't scream at me, So we've had rabid, foaming fans for a long time.
What do you think that is so special about Star Trek that draws people in, as you say, and there are certainly planets in the Star Trek universe that I want to visit.
One of the appeals is that all those stars are not fictional, and one of the appeals that Gene did at the beginning was, the original intent of the show was to tell some adult, sophisticated stories or some morality tales or whatever, and at the time the 60s censors wouldn't let that happen. He'd already, he'd slammed his head against the wall with The Lieutenant, his show that he wanted to do. And along the way, to be able to believe that, he always talked about the believability factor and how the universe of Star Trek had to make sense, and you couldn't take the audience for granted, and you couldn't say, well, the door, the bathroom door was over here one week, and one week it's over here, or, whatever. That's a mundane level, but that was the appeal. But also that they did go and get real science. They did have science advisors. Now, sometimes that got bent for drama. When you talk about that list of stars, there's an awful lot of real stars that got thrown in, and sometimes handled well and handled not. But it's grounded in real history and real stars, and that's why educators embrace Star Trek, because it's a great jumping off place for hard science or theoretical science or history of the social sciences, anthropology and sociology. The only thing I feel for fans now is that all the Star Treks are, a wall of DVD boxes. And this one was made in the 60s during Vietnam and the race riots, and in the 80s there's a therapist on the bridge, and people make fun of that, but it's like, well, people were looking more at mental health issues. And, and DS9 was a darker, grittier show, but it was all made before 9/11, and that was very, prescient. And so people lose the context of when the shows were made, and that's hopefully something that I try to do when I talk to, I used to think that everything was so old as Star Trek, and who needs all this dusty, moldy old information? But we've had so many new fans that it's always good to bring up that context for people, so it's not just, a row of show titles on a box.
I think the amazing thing is that you can apply relevancies to the episodes still to this day. You can look at some of the stuff that was written into Star Trek back then, which was relevant back then, but then it's become this whole new thing again. A war on terror with the war on the Cardassian War and that sort of thing from DS9. We haven't had a ship lost in the Pacific Ocean yet, but 7 years from port, but anything's possible.
Well, right, and I don't know. Here, let's stop a second. Now, we put Star Trek on a pedestal. It's not, it's not God's gift to literature. It's not. There are clinkers. they did, especially the modern shows, did 26 shows a year, hour shows, and now kind of the modern full season in the States is about 22. And Ron Moore and Ira and all those guys, Brannon, would all say, you know what, we could take 4 clinkers back every year easily. Could we just do away with those and we'd go back to 20? And they kind of salivate the fact that now they work on shows where they only do 22. And oh my God, how much better mental health we would have had if we were only facing, when it got to the spring and they were worried about burnout every year and coming up for a strong finish. So not every show was a gem. There are diamonds in the rough. There's usually at least 1 or 2 good things about every show, but some of the ones that are classics and even the middling classics. And as somebody said one time about missing Star Trek on TV since 2005, even if you had critiques of Voyager or Enterprise or any of the shows, a bad Star Trek was still better than 90% of what else was on TV.
You can check out all of those interviews in full. That's spotlight.trekzone.org, and have a look at the whole archive there. We're going to be back next week, Amber, in fresh, clean clothes.
With some real content.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
We'll definitely see how we go. Well, that is SciFi Weekly. That is the clip shows for January. We'll probably have another couple throughout the year.
No more shoddy clip shows until later on in the year.
We promise.
We promise.
Our website is live, scifiweekly.trekzone.org, and coming soon to iTunes, February. I said it last week, February. Don't know which year, but it'll be
probably
February.
already February now.
Tomorrow's February.
Follow, and
subscribe
to us on Twitter, Facebook, and Vimeo. I'm Amber O'Reilly.
And I'm Matt Miller. We are Sci-Fi Weekly.